Every preconceived notion you have is based off some weight of evidence.
Yes.
So then now we're in a circular point, because then we have evidence that you have to believe, and you believe that evidence based off your preconceived notion, based off evidence that you've had before. So you believe evidence based off your priors. Why did you believe the evidence that convinced you of your priors?
I build priors with evidence.
You literally just said you believe your priors based off the evidence that you had before.
No.
Hello, how are you? And just real quick, how old are you?
I'm 18.
What's up?
Chilling, man. All right, I'm an atheist. I got a couple questions, or you can start it how you want.
No, you go with your questions.
Cool. So why do you believe anything said in the Bible?
Because they're trustworthy historical documents based off this historical standards.
Okay. Do you acknowledge that different historical claims have different burdens of proof?
Do I acknowledge that different historical claims have different standards of proof? No, I don't acknowledge that. I think we have the same standard of proof for everything. It's just whether or not you believe it.
Okay, so let me give an analogy. You believe that if 100 people 100 years ago wrote down Bob built a house, and if 100 people 100 years ago wrote down Bob picked up a mountain and threw it into the sky, both would be sufficiently premised.
Yeah, so it's all going to be based off your priors. So your priors is going to determine whether or not you believe the evidence presented before you, but the evidence still weighs the same. It's just where your priors sit. So if you have lower priors, the evidence weighs the same, but it doesn't shift you as much because your priors are lower.
All right, but you understand that, truth and belief are not mutually exclusive.
What does that have to do with anything I just said?
Right. So my preconceptions as to what denotes an extraordinary or supernatural claim has nothing to do with the criteria necessary to premise said claim.
Say that again. I was typing something.
So like my preconception, you're saying priors, you mean that like bias that you have towards the claim itself? Is that what you mean?
Well, your priors is just going to be things that you have like intuition towards. So for example, if you don't think anybody ever could rise from the dead, no matter what, and unless it's some sort of naturalistic thing, well, then your priors on believing any sort of miracle claim are going to be extremely low.
So you don't think you should have any preconceived notions when addressing a claim?
Of course you have preconceived notions. I didn't say you didn't. I said evidence still weighs the same, but your priors is what's going to convince you of the evidence as well. So your priors, what you believe beforehand, is going to have an influence on whether or not that evidence has the same weight to you, but nonetheless, the weight is the same. So for example, let's say you're like, I don't believe you have a dog, and you're proof to me you have a dog. So I show you my dog. And then, okay, that'd be enough evidence to convince you have a dog. But let's say, I don't believe you have a dragon. Prove to me you have a dragon. Well, I show you my dragon. Both is the same amount of evidence, but your priors beforehand is whether or not you're likely to believe it.
Okay. So do you think it's more reasonable to have a higher standard of proof to somebody who says I have a dog than I have a dragon?
It's the same standard of proof and evidence. It's just whether or not you're convinced of it. So for example, if I tell you I have a dog, you're more likely to believe me because people have dogs. But also it doesn't matter in your life on whether or not I have a dog. It doesn't have an influence. You're not going to look through the evidence. So you're just going to be like, okay, I'll take it on your word. Right? The evidence doesn't change. It's just whether or not you're willing to believe it.
I think in order to deconstruct that, you have to acknowledge that, we don't act upon certainty. We don't act upon possibility, but rather probability.
Yeah,
and
that's
whether or not
what I've
the
been
claim
saying.
is possible, right? And whether or not a claim is possible or generally or probable within the natural world definitely differentiates claims. For instance, the analogy of Bob building a house or Bob throwing a mountain, right? One is much more reasonably accepted because it is,
right.
Common in the natural world.
Right. We're just arguing semantics at this point. So the evidence is still the same. It's just your prior probabilities of believing it is what's going to convince you.
No, I'm saying different claims.
Okay, let's say somebody. Let's say we have 100 documents that say somebody built a house, but you don't believe it. What then?
I would.
I'm just talking hypothetically. You don't believe it. You say, I just don't believe it. There's 100 documents. I don't believe it. Does it change the weight of the evidence?
No.
Right. So it doesn't change the weight of the evidence. What changed?
What do you mean in what changed?
What changed? So if evidence, right? If you provide me evidence, and let's say it's 100 documents saying somebody built a house 100 years ago, you're convinced of it. I'm not. What is the differing factor between me and you?
Our filter of reasonability.
So you're just saying I'm
Right.
unreasonable. So you're saying the
Oh,
standard
I'm
of
not saying you're
reasonability
unreasonable.
is you.
Look, I need to address it specifically. Okay, so when we look at different claims, right, it is only reasonable to apply different standards of evidence based on preconceived notions to differentiate like these claims in the first place, right? Like,
What did you just say?
when we're
It's
talking about
based off your preconceived notions. You just said that, right?
which are built upon evidence.
So
Dragons
you
don't
just said
exist.
it's off
So
your
if you
preconceived
say
notions.
I have a dragon, and I say I don't believe you, I don't need to prove you don't have a dragon, right? I can say I don't believe you
That's
because
fine,
there's
but
zero reason to believe
you're
dragons
ignoring the
exist.
fact that it's based off your preconceived notions. Yes.
No, it is not.
So it's not based off your preconceived notions.
Preconceived
Then why'd you
notions are
say
based upon
preconceived
evidence.
notions?
Evidence. That's what I'm saying.
So your preconceived notions, every preconceived notion you have is based off some weight of evidence.
Yes.
Right. Okay. So then now we're in a circular point, because then we have evidence that you have to believe, and you believe that evidence based off your preconceived notion, based off evidence that you've had before. You have this big circular going back infinitum.
No, I'm saying that we use our preconceived notions to filter through claims and apply a different
Right. Your
level
preconceived
of whether or
notions,
not,
your priors.
which are built upon with evidence. That
Right.
is a
So,
logical
okay.
structure.
So you believe evidence based off your priors. Why did you believe the evidence that
No,
convinced
it's the
you
other
of
way
your
around.
prior?
I build priors with
You
evidence.
just said, you literally just said you believe your priors based off the evidence that you had before.
No,
Say it again.
I construct my own biases with evidence, and I use those biases to
Is that
filter
not what
claims.
I just said? I literally just said that. You built your
pivoting.
priors based off evidence. Did you not
Yes.
just say that? Okay. So your priors that you built off evidence. Now you have priors that used
with
to
evidence. Yeah,
say it again. Say it one more time so everybody can hear it again.
exactly what you said. I build
Right.
priors.
So, okay.
with
So then
evidence.
stop arguing with me if it's exactly what I've been saying for the last 5 minutes. You built your priors based off evidence. You're using those priors to analyze new evidence. So you have this circular logic going back.
Not new evidence, new claims, and to differentiate the claims in and of themselves.
Claims. Oh my God, this is so semantic and like pulling teeth. This is ridiculous and stupid.
You literally believe that
You have
all
priors.
claims have the same standard of proof.
That's
Don't call me
not what I
ridiculous.
said.
Yeah, you did. You
I said
all historical
evidence-
claims have the same historical burden of proof. That is ridiculous.
Yes, they do. Now, whether you're convinced of them is going to be based off your priors, which you just admitted to. And that's the whole
Yeah.
thing we've been arguing about. So what
And
separates
why is that not a reasonable mechanism of determining the
it
truth?
is a reasonable mechanism. Why are you arguing with me about it? Because we agree on it.
I'm not
So
talking to you
stop
about
talking
that. I'm
for
talking to
2
you
seconds.
about-
Stop talking for 2 seconds. Your whole argument was that we had evidence and we don't use priors. And then I said, what is the separating factor on whether or not we believe a house was built from 100 years ago with 100 documents? Right? I asked, what was the separating factor between that, me and you? And then you gave a whole argument was your priors that you got off evidence. So what separates between me and you on whether or not we believe someone built a house 100 years ago is what?
The reason.
What is it? What is it? What's the not the reason? Answer the question. What is the separating factor on why we would believe somebody built a house 100 years ago based off 100 historical documents? Say it. What is it?
Priors.
That's all I wanted to get to. So now you've just shown to me. That's fine.
You're doing this to
That's
avoid evidence.
fine. I'm not using that to avoid evidence. What you're doing is being intentionally difficult for no reason. Now, are you willing to have a genuine conversation now?
If you're willing to let me structure my claim without interruption.
I've been
Okay.
absolutely willing to let you talk,
Sure.
but don't argue semantics to a T like that for no good reason. It's pointless and infuriating because we agreed on the same point.
Okay. I'm saying 100 people 100 years ago say Bob built a house.
Okay.
100 people 100 years ago say Bob threw a mountain into the sun. Okay. The reason that you specified on the house, right? Why might I, with the same amount of evidence presented, believe it, and you, with the same amount of evidence presented, not believe it? Okay. Priors. I acknowledge that. However, there is a reasonable mechanism of determining the truth and differentiating the claim of building a house and throwing a mountain based upon the limitations in the natural world. Historical testimony cannot premise supernatural claims.
Right. So you're just imposing the principle of an analogy.
What do you mean?
The principle of analogy is the historical method that says that when you look at anything in history, you have to base it off your understanding of current mechanisms and systems. So if you see something that's not offered in the current system, you have to reject it. This is why miracles are rejected in history, because we don't see it nowadays. We don't measure it nowadays. So when we look at it in history, we put on the principle of analogy and we deny it. That's not a scientific method, because then it doesn't matter how many historical documents we found, doesn't matter how many archaeologically pieces of evidence that we find that back it up. You're always going to reject it because you're imposing the principle of analogy.
I disagree. I'm not acting upon certainty, nor would I wholly, say that resurrections or God's existence or Bob throwing a mountain is entirely impossible. However, I think preconceived notions can make a claim more improbable.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, so can you provide evidence to make these supernatural claims probable?
Yeah, I think the historical accounts are astronomical in comparison to other historical accounts.
So do you believe that the interconnectivity between this historical testimony outweighs all secular notions of what's possible in the natural world?
Yeah, absolutely. Because if we're talking about what's possible in the natural world, then it wouldn't be a miracle in the first place. Because if people rising from the dead was possible in the natural world, we just look back at this and say this is a normal occurrence and it's nothing special. The whole point of Jesus resurrecting off the cross is to stand out and be special and be different and to be unique. Now, we have an astronomical amount of historical evidence for that when you compare it to anybody else in history or any other event in history. And we have no naturalistic explanations for it. So the best explanation that we have is that Jesus Christ rose from the dead.
I think, the options are, I do think that the interconnectivity and the historical repercussions of their claims say that they're probably not lying. Okay. But collective claims and claims collectively made like genuinely, I don't think that adds, viability to a supernatural claim. Like for the same reason, like
so you're just imposing the principle of analogy. You're just appealing to that. It's not something that I see happen today, so therefore I don't believe it.
Probability.
I'm sorry?
I'm trying to get you to acknowledge that it doesn't add probability.
It does add probability. Of course it adds probability. If there was one document written in the past about Jesus Christ's resurrection, would the probability be lower that he resurrected than it is now?
If that's the only evidence we have to analyze, sure.
Yeah, so it does raise probability.
I think the nature of the claim makes it so that's not true, right? If Jesus Christ existing,
right? So you're just appealing to the principle of analogy again. That's all you've been doing. You're just saying
appealing to the principle of analogy. Why is that not a rational mechanism?
Because it's not how you do good science. Because it's dogmatic by nature. Because when you have a principle that you're just saying I'm going to hold to this, and you don't actually have a good reason why, it's just dogmatic. It's not true because I don't see it happen in my day-to-day life. If we held to that, science would have never advanced.
No, I'm saying that there's a collective claims of a supernatural event and then collective claims of a natural event. I think it's perfectly reasonable to apply a further layer of skepticism towards the supernatural claim.
Yeah, that's fine. I'm not saying you can't do that. But there's a certain...
Okay, so that means you just admitted there's a different burdens of proof for different claims.
I know that's not what I said. You said it's reasonable to be more skeptical. Sorry.
Why?
It's reasonable to be more skeptical because of your priors.
Right. And you don't think that the accumulative priors of like secular, like natural possibilities, like outweigh these interconnective claims? That's ridiculous to me.
I don't think it outweighs it. I think it can make you more skeptical towards it. But there's a certain point where you can be too skeptical towards things. This is why we have people who are like flat earthers. Do you not agree there's a certain point where you can be too skeptical? I don't know why I can't say it all of a sudden.
Okay, look. No, I think skepticism is okay if you hold a reasonable criteria.
Well, that's the problem. Define the reasonable criteria.
Right. I think that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence.
Give me the definition of an extraordinary evidence.
Hold on. My girlfriend just got here. I got a dip. I'll take the L.
All right. Appreciate you.
Be safe.
God bless.
I had a hard time believing that guy is 18.
Oh, because he had a deep voice. Like, that was just maddeningly infuriating because he literally was agreeing with me, but was arguing with me for no reason about it. Congratulations, you made it to the end of the video. If you want to watch more, you can click one of these and you can keep watching.